And so I'm going to go back to 145. I always like going back a little bit. But the assembly informed him in deciding terms that they could not comply with either of their requests. On receiving this answer, he immediately, after a short, angry, and threatening speech, prorogued the legislature. He soon after set sail for Europe, then little thinking that he should never return to the country, that by his violent temper and arbitrary conduct he had brought to the brink of civil war. His reception at court convinced the Americans of the truth of what they feared, that the governor had been sent for as a mischievous emissary rather than for an impartial inquiry into the real situation of the province, or an investigation of his own conduct. Thomas Hutchinson, the lieutenant governor, was appointed to succeed Governor Bernard. Hutchinson was a native of Boston and had run a career of popularity. Whilst, however, he was courting the people at home, he was not less assiduous in integrating himself into the favor of the British government. By misrepresenting his countrymen, he was artful and plausible and possessed of popular talents, but was insidious, dark, intriguing, and ambitious, and the extreme of avarice marked every feature of his character. His appointment was announced at the close of the year 1769. We're getting closer and closer to 1776. He immediately assumed a more haughty tone and aimed at more high-handed measures than his predecessor, and commenced his administration by informing the assembly that he was independent of them and the people, as his majesty had made provisions for his salary. Secure of the favor of his sovereign, entreated the people and the assembly with contempt, and answered their repeated solicitations to remove the troops from the capital, but withdrawing the garrison from a strong fortress in the harbor of Boston, who were in the pay of the province, and replacing them by 2 regiments of the king's troops. The embellitions of popular feeling were so high as to occasion great alarm with the leading patriots, that it would break into acts of violence which might injure the cause of the people. The miserable minions of power of America endeavored to promote this result, and openly avowed that only method to restore the tranquility was to take off the original incendiaries whose writing had instilled the poison of sedition into the people. Was to take off the original incendiaries whose writing and instilled the poison of sedition into the people. James Otis, the most active, bold, influential patriot of the day, having published under his proper signature some several strictures of conduct of the officers of the crown, was assaulted in a public room by a band of hired ruffians, whose swords with bludgeonings and being covered with wounds was left for dead. The assassins made their escape and took refuge on board the king's ships in the harbor. Mr. Otis survived, but his but the lamp of his understanding, which had glowed with such effulgence, was overcast with clouds and darkness. Around every cloud is a silver lining. Mr. John Adams says that he laid the foundation of the American Revolution with an energy and with those mastery talents which no other man possessed, and it is justly considered as the first martyr to the American liberty. So the imbellions of popular feeling were so high as to occasion great alarm with the leading patriots that it would break out into acts of violence which might injure the cause of the people. The miserable minions of power in America endeavored to promote this result, and openly avowed that the only method to restore tranquility was to take off the original incendiaries whose writing had instilled the poison of sedition into the people. Now, that's kind of like what's happened with the manipulation of the cabal deep state parties that are not following the Constitution and are they're committing acts of sedition. So, and they call it the poison of sedition. So the only way or method to restore tranquility, avowed that the only method to restore tranquility was to take off the original incendiaries whose writing had instilled the poison of sedition into the people. James Otis, the most active, bold, influential patriot of the day, having published under his proper signature some severe strictures on the conduct of the officers of the crown, was assaulted in public room by a band of hired ruffians with swords and bludgeons, and being covered with wounds was left for dead. So James Otis, he was a true influential patriot of the Americas, but was killed. The assassins made their escape and took refuge on board the king's ships in the harbor. Mr. Otis survived, but the lamp of his understanding, which had glowed with such effulgence, was overcast with clouds and darkness. Well, it looks like he survived. He was left for dead, so he wasn't killed, but he was left for dead, but he survived. Mr. Otis survived, but the lamp of his understanding, which had glowed with such effulgence, was overcast with clouds and darkness. And I have to say, yesterday there was an attempt on President Donald Trump. It was in the news, and today is the 11th? Is today the 11th now? Oh, I'm getting backtracked. So, he survived, and it was a failed attempt. It was a failed attempt of assassination on our President of the United States of America. So you can kind of see the interplay of this book and what's really going on today in my real time. October, let's see, yeah. The attempt was yesterday on the 10th of August, and today's the 11th. So I'm a little bit behind on my dates. So, Mr. Otis survived, but the lamp of his understanding, which had glowed with such effulgence, was overcast with clouds and darkness. So, we will be brave. America has thought-provoking people of all ages and all sizes and all color, because color coding is an invention. It's not a truth. Will prevail. Mr. John Adams says that he laid the foundation of the American Revolution with an energy and with those masterly talents with no other man possessed. And he's complimenting James Otis. And he is justly considered as the first martyr to American liberty. So, James Otis is the first martyr to American liberty. The insults which the inhabitants constantly experienced from the soldiers increased their animosity towards them to such a degree as to lead to violence and bloodshed. On the 2nd of March, 1770, an affray took place between a party of soldiers of the 29th Regiment and some rope makers in front of Mr. Gray's rope walk. This was followed by more alarming outrage on the 5th. The indignant populace pressed upon the insulted the soldiers while under arms and assailed them with clubs, sticks, and snowballs, covering stones, being dared to the fire by the mob. 6 of the soldiers discharged their muskets, which killed 3 of the citizens and wounded 5 others. The effect of this was electric. The town was instantly in commotion, and the mass of the people were so exasperated that it required the utmost exertions to prevent their rallying and driving the British myrmidons out of town. And nothing but an assurance that the troops should be withdrawn prevented this resort to force. The captain of the party and 8 men were brought to trial. 2 of the men were found guilty. The captain and the other men were acquitted. A general meeting of the inhabitants was immediately assembled in Faneuil Hall, who unanimously restored that no armed forces should be suffered longer to reside in the capital, and a committee was appointed to wait on the governor and request the immediate removal of the troops. The governor refused to act under pretense of authority, but Colonel Dalrymple, alarmed at the state of things, proposed to withdraw the 29th Regiment, which was more culpable than any other. But he was informed that not a soldier should be left in town. He was reluctantly compelled to comply, and within 4 days not a redcoat remained. So they were the British redcoats. This tragical affair produced the deepest impressions on the minds of the people, and the anniversary of the massacre of the 5th of March, 1770, was commemorated for many years, and orations delivered, which unfolded the blessings of civil liberty, the horrors of slavery, the dangers of standing armies, and the rights of the colonies. Now, this is what people are afraid of. Portland, Oregon had Antifa battles and, the breakdown of the communities in Seattle, Washington, and you had rogue people that were supposed to do peaceful protest actually create dangerous, violent uprisings. And this is what they're experiencing in Boston here in the book. So, let's backtrack to 147. The tragical affair produced the deepest impressions on the minds of people, and the anniversary of the massacre of the 5th of March, 1770 was commemorated for many years, and orations delivered, which unfolded the blessings of civil liberty, the horrors of slavery, the dangers of standing armies. So, because, you know, they could just take over, like, you know, people that are armed, and if they're among people that, you know, have very little ability or practice of protecting themselves, they could be taken over. So, the dangers of standing armies and the rights of the colonies. And see, the people of the colonies, they do have rights. These annual orations administered fuel to the fire of liberty and kept it burning with an incessant flame, and in no small degree promoted the cause of the colonies in a manner that served to give a deeper glow to the flame of liberty. In the spring of 1770,